Welcome to the Black Box of Media, brought to you by Ultimate Edge Communications. I'm your host, Aleisha McCall, and this is Season 3, Episode 14. This podcast lifts the lid on the hidden strategies behind high-performance media advertising. If you've ever wondered why some campaigns fall flat and others absolutely crush it, this is where we break it all down. Today, we are unpacking one of the most complex marketing environments in retail, where brand, operations, and human behavior collide in real time. Joining me today is Yvette Costi, Chief Marketing Officer at Bloom's the Chemist, a network of 130 stores and 150 plus stakeholders, and one of the only truly independent pharmacy brands in Australia. This is not just about what's working in marketing and media advertising. This is about where influence, leadership, and making strategy actually land where it matters most, at the customer counter. Yvette sits in a really interesting space at the centre of a system that most marketers have never actually had to deal with, balancing head office strategy, store level execution, supplier relationships, board expectations, and customer outcomes. What's going to make this conversation really different is the tension between what should work in theory, but what actually works at the counter level. So from a deliberate shift in B2B marketing targeting pharmacists instead of consumers, to rediscovering the power of timing, the old school channels that still add value in today's world, we are going to look at diagnosing performance, issues at a store level, and take a real look at how marketing decisions actually play out in the wild. So this is going to be a fantastic session. Yvette, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast with us today. Welcome.
Oh, thanks so much, Aleisha. I'm delighted to be here. I'm looking forward to a good conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, look, Yvette, do you want to start off before we dive deep into the questions, just by giving our listeners a bit of a background on your role, the day-to-day, what's involved, and some of the context before we get into the questioning?
Sure. So, as you said, I'm Chief Marketing Officer for Bloom's the Chemist, and we are a community or retail pharmacy brand, and we have 130 stores in every state, bar the capital state, I think, across Australia. And each one of our stores, and I say our loosely, pharmacists own their own pharmacies. So we are, in fact, a management services company. So those pharmacists join our brand, pay a membership fee in exchange for the ability to use the brand, the license to use the brand, and then we provide services for that fee as well. And what that does is it allows small business owners to access far bigger and more mature infrastructure in order for them to be able to trade and make money and do what they need to do in supporting communities. My role within that ecosystem is looking after brand, marketing, communications, and e-commerce. I have a wonderful team here at our support office, as we call it, and we cover everything from local area marketing requests to change Google business listing opening hours, right through to launching big multi-omni-channel national campaigns.
Fantastic. Well, it's quite the gig you've got going on there. And of course, with, when you look at the typical business owner being able to take that, burden's probably the wrong word, but take that weight off their shoulders so that they can just focus on the day-to-day and serving the customer. And, you guys can work your magic in the marketing and media advertising space. It's a pretty good model.
Oh.
So what I want to do today with you, Yvette, is I want to get into sort of this nitty-gritty in this unique context that you find yourself in, having to be responsible and deliver for, 130 different realities in different locations. So to get us started, I'd love to hear how you balance national brand activity, the core brand, the message, with the local store needs, because it always seems to be that constant balance of where do we put the money where it's going to pay off most.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think the answer I would have given you 4 years ago is probably different to the answer I'll give you today. When I first joined Bloom's and we did a bunch of market research, and like all marketers, we look at kind of the funnel, where are we leaking, where are we doing well. We've always done well in that consideration transaction to preference. So if you try us, you fall in love with us and you keep coming back. The difference for us was always that you have some of the biggest media consuming giants in the country, agnostic of category, in our category. So we really had to contend with that, and finding any share of voice without having really, really deep pockets has been a very, very difficult thing for us over the last 4 years. So initially our issue was awareness. We just needed as many people in Australia who would shop at a pharmacy, which out of, I think, roughly 27 million Australians, I think 27 million Australians, it's about anywhere between 18 and 20 million people. So it's a category that is very broad. And so for us, it was really trying to get as many people as possible to recognize the name and also associate it with what is special about us, which is that very hyper-personal, hyper-human friendly way to take charge of your own health. Once we'd gone through 2 cycles of that, probably 2 financial years of really concentrating on building awareness at the national level, what became evident was that people were receptive to the message, but they weren't necessarily able to go in store and purchase because we only have 130 stores compared to like the category leader that's almost 600. So we took a step back and said, okay, we need to grow the network. So that's where our B2B strategy started to come to the fore, which is in the last 12 months. And since then, we've been looking at, once we turn our hand back to our B2C strategy, what's that going to look like? And really for us, that is a hyper-localized, hyper-personalized type of marketing. It is the same messaging because one of the gifts of this role and this brand generally is that there is almost a homogenous consistency of that human, personalized, very friendly, like accessible care and service that you get at every single one of our stores. And that comes out in every survey that we do, every mystery shopper, all of our brand health stuff. But what we don't need to do is spend money in an area where that person actually can't go in and transact. Whilst we have the website and
It's
most
not
of our
accessible, right? So it's
yeah,
like, why is it, if I'm going to, and often you've only got sort of 1 or 2 pharmacies within your, 5 to 10K radius, right? Like
brilliant.
if you've got those reliance. So it's like, if they're not there, that totally makes sense. Remove the wasted budget, focus on where you are. And yes, you'll get that trickle feed up into e-commerce from an overall point of view, but less likely, right? To your point, when you
Absolutely.
build the brand, you get the locations right there, where you.
Yeah, so that's why it's a 2-speed approach. Like we've got to be working on broadening out the network so that accessibility is ever expanding, which is harder than you would think because it's not a case of finding a site and putting a pharmacy in. It's a highly regulated industry. So there are only 6,000 pharmacies, 6,000 and some change pharmacies in Australia. And
Yeah, wow.
every one of those has what is called a PBS approval number. And that can only be transferred as far as 1.5 kilometres away from the original site. So it's such a juggling act, and there's such a there's a dearth of like availability. You just kind of, you're trying to find the right fit, the right cultural fit, the right town where there's not 15 pharmacies for only 150 people, that kind of thing. So
Not a great business decision.
no, so we do search on a whole raft of criteria, and we have an amazing team that kind of do all of this data metabolization and give us insights and say, okay, these are the areas that we should be looking at.
Yep.
You also don't want to go in where one of our major competitors is there and really dominating the town as well. So that B2B strategy is fundamental. But then the B2C strategy, as you say, there's no point in spending money on these kind of ostentatious big national campaigns anymore, because if you can't come in and transact, then there's no point. Also, when you know that you cannot compete with the budgets of your major competitors, you've got to do something different. Like you just have to. So,
And how do you manage? Because there's something in that, like there's 2 parts to that, right? Is like you're in that sense of, okay, yes, we've got to do something different. We're, the underdog coming into a much larger space. And while the pie is not necessarily going to grow, maybe if we could just chip away and get some of that pie, well, there's value in that as well.
yeah.
So how do you, I can definitely appreciate the way in which you've been able to successfully differentiate the Blooms brand. Because I know myself, walking into one of those Chemist, you certainly feel a sense of protection and care and sort of that more one-to-one educational discussion, which is a beautiful experience when you're going into a pharmacy, because it can be quite personal a lot of the time. So how are you able to, 2-part question, how are you able to differentiate in those more competitive environments? And then the second part is sort of when you go into the analysis of, okay, well, do we support our high performing stores? Do we support our, do we give those low performing stores a boost? Do we give the new ones a bit more of a boost? How are you thinking about that holistically? Because I think a lot of marketers are in a similar position, whether it's in retail, multi-location, to sort of go, okay, well, what is it that's actually going to shift the needle for us in this environment?
Yeah. And it's a constant quandary. So to answer your first part of the question around the differentiation, particularly when you have competitors in the immediate locale, there's a number of different things for us. So our purpose is to build a future where everyone everywhere has access to good health and well-being. So that drives the entire organization. And I can say hand on my heart that everyone here in the support office and across 130 stores, we've worked really hard for everyone to be aligned under that purpose. What that means then is it becomes very easy to make decisions around differentiation. We push it through that filter. And if it's something that's going to ensure that an individual who might be in a low socioeconomic bracket or a pensioner or whatever is actually not going to reach their healthcare goals, then it's something that is kind of a no-brainer for us. And what I mean by that is when 60-day dispensing was announced, that's when you could take a prescription and get 2 of your medicine on kind of limited SKUs. A lot of the pharmacies started to charge for dosage administration. So that's when elderly people or people with chronic conditions get those Webster packs that have morning tea, lunch, afternoon tea, dinner, and some of them were charging up to $55 per pack or $50 every time your doctor tried to change something, and we maintained that would always be free with us. Always free. We also offer free home delivery, which most pharmacy brands don't. And then we double down on things like sleep health that actually would improve the outcomes of a raft of chronic conditions. So I think for us, from a differentiation point of view, right? So from a differentiation point of view, very much focused on how can we improve the lives and the quality of health of our patients. That's a no-brainer.
Beautiful. Yeah. And that allows you to be able to have that distinctive, very, I would say, emotive conversation that will start to pull away maybe from the more generic sort of bulk offering. Because if you want that tailored experience, if you want that uniqueness, then you have a solution in Blooms. Awesome. Okay, so then if we move to the second part of that question around looking at, you're in this, we've only got, and we're talking with marketers and media advertisers all the time around, there's only so much budget to go around. So we've got these meaty objectives to achieve, and we've got, in your case, 130 locations that need to be catered for. How do you think about, high-performing locations, low-performing locations, the new locations? How do you sort of split that and look at that from a strategic point of view to go, okay, well, what is going to get us individually for these individual stores to their outcome, but what's going to make the difference overall?
Yeah. I mean, it's a constant balancing act. Ultimately, every single one of those stores is paying fees. Their fees may kind of go up and down depending on their size and the amount of staff, but the amount that they pay for marketing support is broadly similar across all 130 stores. So it's like kids everyone has to have the
Everyone's got to
same
eat.
base level. Yeah. And then you need to think about an equitable amount of supports. There are some stores, like some of our Metro Sydney stores, that have been in the network for 40 odd years. They are over and above, operating at a level where any kind of additional intervention from us is not going to move the dial.
But they've got it. They've got it covered. They've got
They've
the
got it
communities.
covered.
Yeah.
And then there are stores in areas where we're new. So we entered Tasmania, I think probably 2.5 years ago. So when you're doing that, you obviously make a concerted effort. Same with Northern Territory. We had 2 stores launching in Northern Territory at the same time, and then we had another 2 open. So when you're going into a state or a territory for the first time and the brand is relatively unknown, we have an obligation then as a kind of a promise to those stores, not only to deliver baseline marketing services and benefits, but also something else to kind of give them the best fighting chance.
Yeah, okay, now that makes a lot of sense. Now, if we move into this dealing with sort of attribution, I guess the the meaty part of the media advertising aspect, right? Of looking at, okay, well, how do you look in from a media advertising point of view? What drove the result? What got me, the dollars in the bank account, so to speak? How do you deal with attribution in a bricks and mortar business, so to speak? And how do you think about the link between, let's just start with sort of media and foot traffic? So you're doing, and you're offline, you're online, you're doing a whole bunch of different, deploying a whole bunch of different strategies.
Mhm.
How do you think about the role of each of those platforms and the way in which you attribute success to them as you go through the media buying process?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the perennial question, isn't it? And the question that boards consistently ask. I remember about 10 years ago in my career, I was in London and I was working in residential property. And it was really before, like, there was no Google Suite to speak of. Digital marketing was, particularly for that industry, so new. Like, marketing automation, what kind of
Yeah,
thing.
what's that?
And that was a hard graft. Here, it's not as difficult because footfall cameras now are incredible in the sense that the level that they're actually able to integrate with AI and exclude faces that go in, put a script in, leave, do their grocery shopping, and come back in again. And the data's only kept for a 24-hour period, so we're not kind of breaching anybody's
Yep.
personal privacy. So you can read Bloom's logo on a shirt. There's all of these.
And it can eliminate that data. And I think that in itself is quite brilliant, because when you're talking about the way in which you're capturing that data at a footfall level, again, across 130 different locations, and again, you're starting to get an idea of female, male, age, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What that can inform from who is actually coming into our stores, who's our ideal, who do we want to come into our stores? I'd imagine that in itself, from a traffic aspect, would be huge.
It's huge. And look, we are very, very fortunate as a category, because you come in and drop off a script and all of the information about you is in the dispensing software because of the level of regulation that the industry has. And whilst we don't have any identified data, we can de-identify that data and find out gender, age. You can then start grouping kind of chronic conditions, and then you can compare it against census data, which we do a lot.
Yeah, wow, just to get an indication.
Yeah, so just say, for example, our store in Bathurst, if you look at the census data for Bathurst, and I'm using proxy data here, this is
of course.
This example, if Bathurst is kind of over-indexing on high cholesterol and chronic heart conditions, and yet their dispensing data is below the network average, you've got a discrepancy there in that they should be way above. So you know that there's market share to be won in Bathurst on cholesterol and heart health. And we can actually give them those insights and start saying, okay, let's look at some local area marketing activity, some campaigns that we can do to actually drive, footfall and bring the right people in, so then we can actually see those particular SKUs increase. So we're fortunate in that way. Sometimes my team kind of, bang their heads against the wall about, how highly regulated we are. And I say, it gives with one hand whilst it takes with the other. Like, there's so much benefit.
It's a trade-off, right? It's a trade-off.
It's a trade-off, absolutely. So, you have this really clever facial recognition technology. It also eliminates little people, as in kids, and you start to get really, really accurate footfall numbers. And then when you're running a campaign, again, because, you've got basket size, you've got number of transactions, and you have your conversion based on all of those with the footfall. And then if you've got a campaign in particular like sleep health that you're running, if the sales of sleep apnea machines go up, or magnesium, or whatever it is that we're promoting, you can actually see it in real time.
The direct correlation.
Yeah, exactly.
And so when you look at, so there's so many good points in that. When you look at sort of the combination then of channels that you would go after, I've been speaking a lot with CMOs and marketers recently about, the traditional way in which we would say, look, we spent $100,000 on Google, we got a 3.5 times return on ad spend, and so therefore that is what it is. Taking into consideration that they went to Meta, spoke to a girlfriend, read a review, went back via direct, and then finally made their purchase, but Google's looking like a rock star because it's like,
Yes.
hey, we
Yeah,
spent
yeah.
100, we got 3.5, we got, 150,000, 3.5 times return on ad spend, happy days. When actually now the world has changed and we need to move to these measurement frameworks that really start to take into
Yeah.
consideration like what's our, to your point, our average order value, our lifetime value, what is the combination of channels. And so I can imagine in the marketing meetings and the boardrooms, what is going on in your world here? How are you? Because you guys, you've got a relatively broad set of channels that you're applying, you're offline, online.
Yeah.
How are you guys having that attribution conversation internally? Because I think this is a real sticking point for a lot of marketers at the moment, just to go, okay, what do I need to accept that I'm not going to get a direct result from, Meta and Google and TikTok? How am I now going to, without going into multi-mix modeling and so on, how am I going to get a good sense? Like as a CMO, how am I going to get a good sense that this is the combination that's working best for me now? So could you shed some light on that for us of just from your perspective, what you're doing and what you're running with your team? Because I think then a lot of marketers will go, yeah, you know what, we might give that a crack.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's again horses for courses. You're going to get a really, really different result for offline, traditional channels in regional Australia. So we tend to do a lot more radio and a lot more print in regional Australia because people still read newspapers and listen to the radio in real time in regional Australia. Whereas in Metro Sydney, bless them, but it's also highly hyper-localized as well. Whereas if you're listening to Nova, you could be anywhere in a metro area, which for us is a real difficulty to kind of measure any attribution. Plus, I always say, as much as radio is fantastic for just keeping the brand top of mind, there's not an awful lot you can do when you're driving and you hear something. Often it will be a broad seasonal kind of message. Blue Shot's now in, at
Creating
Blooms
value for the
Chemist.
consumer.
Are you doing the right thing by your family around, strengthening immunity? Come see us at Bloom's Chemist. We can give you all the information kind of thing. Whereas some of our competitors will say, Metamucil, $10 off today. Like, I hear that and I'm like, yes, but how much is it everywhere else? I can't Google it. I can't compare.
And am I even at that point of consideration, right? Because it's like if I'm driving in my car, I've got a million things in my mind. What is it that's going to interrupt?
By the time I get out, I've completely forgotten. I'm in perimenopause. I can't remember the word for mug most days of the week. So, so it's a really interesting kind of, again, multi-speed approach. Because regional Australia, you can be very, very traditional. And the rates are a lot lower as well, so your money goes further. For us with Google, I always enjoy looking at the results and the data from Google because of the way that we set the campaigns up. So we set them up individually for each store as store traffic campaigns. And depending on what people are engaging with, you can then tell the time difference between when they engaged with the ad and when their phone crossed the threshold of the store. So you use the Google business listing and then you use the campaign and the Google suite, and we can then figure that out. So if the lag time is like 3 weeks, the likelihood that that ad drove someone in as last touch attribution is pretty low. But if the lag time is an hour, 2 hours, even 24 hours, we can assume some level of kind of
direct impact
further towards the end attribution. By no means am I the person that understands the mechanics of how this works. I mean, ask my team.
No, and this is the thing, right? But I think it's interesting because at each of the levels through, the marketing team, it's sort of, you've got the guys that are on the tools doing what they're doing on a day-by-day basis, incredibly, doing great stuff. But really from your point of view, coming at it from the CMO level is okay, and this is a good segue, is sort of, well, what are those signals that you're relying on when you can't see the clear conversion path? And a lot of this in the conversations I've been having with CMOs and marketers has been really, well, I just need, my 4 or 5 different indicators or my 4 or 5 different signals to know things are on track. So how do you find, obviously leading a team, multiple people working across multiple different campaigns, what are your signals or indicators or maybe that gut instinct that you just know in those moments that, okay, yes, this mix, this whatever we're doing is on the right track?
Yeah, well, at a consumer level, i.e. how what we're doing on behalf of every store is actually impacting them from a bottom line point of view is footfall, conversion rate, basket size, numbers of transactions, but also depending on what it is that the campaign is heroing, are we seeing any movement in numbers of scans at the register?
And so that's another indicator that you can go, right, if my scans are good, so to speak, now I know everything's on. And I think this is key, Yvette, and I just, the conversations I'm having in market is just, as everything gets more overwhelming, there's more to track, there's more to do, there's more KPIs, the board wants more, the stores want more. What is it that I can just hang on to, in one hand? Like, what are the 5 things that I just need to focus on? And if I know those signals, those indicators are moving in the right direction, good, right? And then I focus on the problems, because for you as a CMO, you're walking in it, in the morning and it's like, right, what fires have I got to deal with today?
Yeah, and we're doing that. And we're doing that at the B2B and the B2C level.
Yeah.
So as an example, this was our first 12 months where we ran consolidated, concerted kind of B2B campaigns. We went through a process with an incredible agency that we work with, and we kind of looked at what is our B2B CVP? Like, what is the customer value proposition? And what we all thought it was, it wasn't. And you learn things about your own organization. We took that, we crafted these campaigns around things that we thought were really important to pharmacists. And it's interesting when a campaign that you thought was going to drive maybe 50 marketing qualified leads outperforms and drives 180 odd. And then the one that you think is going to be like your hero drives 70. Yeah. And I think that's been an incredible learning experience as well, because when we look at the B2C, we're marketing to 18 to 20 million Australians, but not really, because not all of them can access a Bloom store. So then you start to break it down.
Or not all of them are in the database, or you haven't got that first party data, of 18 million might have 1 million or whatever it might be.
That's right. Exactly that. So in that regard, when you're looking at B2C, we're looking at what is the impact to the store from a purchases, from a feet through the door point of view. So Google's impact on that, and the way that we set those campaigns up, is just how many of those phones that have interacted with those ads past those Google business listing.
Which is a great correlation. I mean, that, to be able to have that level of correlation, and to your point, within the 24, 48 hours, whatever, well, the 2 hours, they're the kind of things that you go, okay, great, that's something in an uncertain world, that's something that I can count on and go, right, there's a direct correlation there that we can keep building upon.
Yeah, and it's a metric that I can stand in front of, 200 people at our conference and say, we have seen the benefit of this. These are the stores that have benefited from it most. We can tell you why. It is because their population is between this age and this age. You start getting an aging population, and the relevance of Google kind of plummets. So I remember looking at 130 stores and the Google referrals for each store, and right at the bottom was Kiama. People are either on holiday or they're retired. And not retired as in baby boomers, but retired. Yeah. Like 80 and 100. So that stands to reason. And then you go to somewhere like Mudgee, who consistently is at the top, and Goulburn, that's consistently at the top. And you've got people who have basically done a tree change. They've moved from Sydney. They can now work entirely from home. They're upwardly mobile. They're looking for proactive measures to prolong their good health. And that all stands to reason. So then it all starts to stack up, and you feel really confident standing up in front of, 150, 200 stakeholders talking about this data, because you can actually get behind it. And the same thing for the board. Whereas, sometimes traditional media, print media, we've done things like that. You have to then add something else in. So for us, we will have an element for our loyalty campaign. Join the loyalty campaign, bring this ad in, join the loyalty campaign. We'll scan the QR code, and you get, I don't know.
And now you've got a feedback loop, right? Because now you've got your feedback loop of, okay, great. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I always say, the two things that benefited the most from COVID were dogs, because their owners were at home.
Yep.
And the QR code. Like, who knew this thing that was just this relegated to the pile of irrelevance pre-2020, and then, but it's been brilliant.
Because it gives you that in an untrackable, and in some cases an untrackable world, you're able to now find these sort of like pieces of certainty, the QR code, whatever it might be, to go, right, now I can see my feedback loop, how people are moving through the funnel. And I think, I always say sort of e-commerce is, the the golden egg, because there's, you can track everything, you can
Oh,
see right through the funnel, there's no breakage, it's fantastic. But the moment you get into this retail cycle, and now you're sort of going like impression, click, maybe product view,
mm,
in-store visit, pop out, go back in again, then
yeah.
finally purchase. It's about, being able to track that back to some of the intent-driven media advertising moments that happened online. And so, you guys doing that with your QR codes and whatever else, they're the kind of things that you can just start to bed down. I'm interested to understand what is working right now that surprised you. I know you and I spoke briefly about the January Blues
Mm,
campaign that,
mm.
it was out of the ordinary. I'm interested to know, with everything changing so quick, what's surprising you? What's working that maybe you didn't think would be the case?
Do you know what? It is anything where we get the assumption about human nature correct.
Hmm.
So, and the January Blues is the perfect example for that.
Yep.
So I'll give a quick background
Yep.
on that campaign was. So it was our first B2B campaign, and we completely lowballed it on the KPI because we thought, well, we just don't know, and we're not spending a huge amount of money on
Hmm.
it. But the human psychological and behavioral assumption was correct. And that was after the November, December period, which is typically insane for pharmacies for a few reasons. And people are going on holiday and they need to get their scripts fulfilled because oftentimes they don't know if in a regional area or a coastal area or overseas, you certainly can't get your script filled overseas. So everyone's filling their scripts before they go away. Everyone's assuming that there'll be days that the pharmacies are closed, which is correct. It's usually just Christmas Day and Boxing Day, but still. And then the third thing is that most Australians don't realise is that there's the Medicare safety net. So your safety net resets as of the 1st of January. And the
Hmm.
safety net is a threshold based on your household income that says once you've spent X amount on any kind of healthcare, whether it be the GP, specialists, PBS medications, whatever it might be, everything thereon is free because you have put your hand into your pocket.
Hmm.
Kind of the less you earn, the lower your safety net kind of threshold is, and then the more you earn, the higher it is. Most people never reach their safety net. I did for the first time when I was pregnant because I had kind of a number of different things. I was like, what do you mean it's free? But it's just fascinating how many Australians don't realize what it
No,
is.
I never knew it until you shared it with me. I never knew. So it
Yeah,
was like, okay, this is good to know, because as to your point, most don't reach it. So
no,
if you don't reach it, you
no,
don't
you
know.
don't reach it, you'll never know. So December's insane because most people want to get everything fulfilled before the
Hmm.
safety net resets because then they have to start paying, particularly pensioners, people
Yep.
on people on benefits, all that kind of stuff. So December is insane.
Menace.
And our assumption was January, and just speaking to our own pharmacist, is where most pharmacists take annual leave because
Yep.
it's quiet and you can
Got
leave
the
the
lull.
pharmacy.
Hmm.
Yeah, if most people are away. So we thought, do you know what? They've been burnt out through November and December. Why don't we do a campaign that focuses on feeling blue after such a crazy period? Now you're on holiday. Do you not want to go back? Well, what if you could go back and not have to do payroll, not have to do your BAS, not have to order your stock every day, not have to.
So
And all
this was a B2B driven campaign to
yeah,
talk directly to the pharmacists. Yeah,
directly
beautiful.
to pharmacist
Yeah.
owners. And we just got that 100% right.
And you know what I think of it? And sorry to interrupt, I was thinking about this the other day when you initially shared it with me, was in January, there's a lot of, new year, new me, let's go, like a lot of positive uplift of
Yeah.
like, make this your best year yet, blah, blah, blah. You guys kind of came in with the complete opposite, right? So you were having the
Yeah.
complete opposite conversation around like,
Yeah.
this is, and yes, there was a positive anecdote to it, but it was a different angle, which I kind of thought,
Mm.
okay, well, maybe it was kind of like when Patagonia came out with the Black
Oh,
Friday
don't
campaign,
buy
where it was like,
today. Yeah.
don't buy today, don't buy from
Yeah.
us. And it was so, quite similar as sometimes when you tell people not to do something or you kind of address the issue,
Mm.
you get a surprising result.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's kind of marketing 101. Like, where
Yeah.
is your target audience's headspace at that point in time?
Yeah.
And what do you have to sell that's actually
Hmm.
going to ease their burden, address their challenges, and
Yeah.
not talk to them about your services and your brands first. So my most recent background before I came to Blooms was B2B marketing. It was my first foray really into B2B marketing, but I learned an enormous amount during that period
Hmm.
of time. And one of the models that we always used was understand the needs and the challenges of your customer, then
Mhm.
align the features of your service or product, tell them the benefits, and then prove that what you're saying is correct. And we just used that format, that methodology, and
Mhm.
developed, lead magnets that actually spoke to the challenges and the needs, that actually then revealed the features aligned with those
Yep.
challenges of need and needs, revealed the benefits, and then a whole bunch of case studies to say, well, we're not full of shit. It actually works.
Here it is. Yeah.
So yeah, it was fantastic. It was great. So we got that structure of how to talk to a B2B customer. I mean, how to talk to anybody when you're trying to market something to them. Don't ram your brand down their throat. Actually give them the solution to the
Yep.
thing that's hardest for them was always the right way to go, but actually understanding the psychological and mental load of a pharmacist in January
Mhm.
was key there.
Yep.
Um,
Just to tap into that pain point and then overcome it with because
yeah,
it was that whole looking at, that role of more maybe some of the more traditional marketing aspects. We're in this world now of AI and how we can create leverage and AI
yeah,
agents to do marketing and blah, blah, blah. But when you kind of come back to it, this is really the fundamentals
mm,
of, what makes marketing campaigns great and where you can kind of tap into in a very noisy world to go in right into the problem, philosophical, external, internal, whatever it might be, and then pull out that solution.
yeah, absolutely. And look, there are only 36,000 registered pharmacists in Australia. A
Wow.
portion of those work in hospital pharmacy. A portion of those don't have their own stores.
Yep.
So you then go from 36,000 as your target down to about, I don't know, you're probably looking at maybe, well, 6,000 and then some change because
Yep.
some pharmacies have two owners. And then you start to whittle down, well, there are certain brands and certain pharmacists that own in those brands that won't be receptive to our offer. And so you whittle it and whittle it. And a small target market seems at the surface brilliant because you can
Mhm.
talk to all of them, but it's fundamentally so difficult to target such a small group of people. So then we had to get really creative and think, okay, other than some of the more traditional, like there are, B2B magazines and they all have circular emails, you can get a soulless email and all that kind of stuff. How are we actually going to do this? And it's just a constant reminder that despite you working in a B2B environment, they're human beings and all human beings tend to use the same sort of things in order to get their news. So it was great because I remember when I had to deliver the news to the team that we were pivoting from 95% B2C focus to basically 80% B2B and keeping the lights on with B2C. They were all terrified. Like, I've never done B2B marketing. It's okay. It's just you're speaking
We
to someone in a work context, but they're still a human. And that campaign was a really good litmus test for that, just to show them we focused on the human need, the human challenge, and spoke to that.
It's actually quite brave when you think about going from being the B2C marketing team, doing what you're doing, growing the brand, and then to flip that over to go, right, now the focus is on acquiring, acquisition,
Yeah.
acquiring these owners to come in and run these Blooms chemists. That is a brave and quite bold move. It was obviously a very clear strategy to go from, okay, we need to build the consumer awareness, we need to build the demand, one-on-one, build the demand. Now, once we've got that demand, we're going to pivot and we're now going to go after acquiring the
Mm.
pharmacists to run these stores so that we can increase and then service the demand that we've created. And then once we've done that, we're now going to get this balance or equilibrium. That's quite bold
Mm. Yeah, it
to
is.
go and do that quite as sharply as you did. What was some of the learnings and the insights out of that? Because I think a lot of marketers often will sit on these kind of decisions in and around, "Oh, maybe that feels a little bit too risky." And sometimes it just
Mhm.
does take, one person or the board or whatever to say, right, we are going in this direction. This is
Mm.
what we're doing. And then you just make it work. What was that for you guys? Was it a subtle go? What was the decision behind it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question and a valid one to ask
Mm.
because I think I've always there's two things at play. I've always kind of been a bit of a fixer CMO. So prior to this, wherever there was, I don't know, marketing operations or digital transformation or whatever that needed to happen, I was the kind of CMO that people hired. I didn't set out to be that. It just you do it once, then you talk about it,
You get the
you
call. You get the call. It's like, okay, there's something's
yeah.
gone off, a bomb's gone off. Okay, you got the call. What are we going
Yeah,
to
that's
solve?
right.
What are we going
And
to
people are
fix?
like,
Yep.
"Okay, she can fix things." So I had full confidence that I was capable of communicating the needs in order to be able to make this happen. But what was really interesting was, like most marketers, you join an organization and you follow the money.
Mhm.
And I remember when I joined, and, if you've not worked in this industry before, you don't realize that all the stores that bear the sign aren't owned by the brand. So you learn that and you're like, okay, so the business that pays me, how does it make money? And you dig and you dig and you dig and you get there. And then that's when I turned around and said, well, surely we just need more stores. And I did this whole kind of B2B go to market presentation to the board, which was really well received 2 years prior to that strategy even being considered again. And what it goes to show is that an organization that is not unilaterally ready at a leadership level to accept an idea, you just have to be patient and wait. And I think, I have
Such good advice. Such good advice.
Well, I have the benefit of working with some really very bright humans in this organization. And one in particular, my colleague, Pamela Bishop, she and I actually met on the Marketing Academy scholarship. We were scholars together. And she was the one that referred me for the role and all that kind of stuff. And she had been plugging away for years at this concept of a purpose-driven organization. The ESG should be baked into everything that we do, and that we should be a B Corp registered company. And I remember learning and realizing when I first came how long she'd been working on that, and just her tenacity and her patience. I'm tenacious, but I'm not patient by nature. So when I presented that B2B strategy to the board, and it was really well received, and then I just couldn't get traction at the executive committee level, I thought, it's okay. It's okay. This will figure its way front of mind when the organization is ready. And it happened. That is what happened.
Yeah.
So I think for me, psychologically, my head was already around the idea. Secondly, I had always been the kind of person that was dumped in kind of a bit of a situation of adversity or challenge and needs to find their way back out. That was fine. The hardest part was the people change management with humans. Just getting people, really genuinely talented, bright humans, to realize that just because they've applied a set of skills to that audience does not mean they are incapable of applying the exact same skills to that audience. And I don't know whether it's just something that was instilled in me going to an all-girls school from the age of 6, but I perhaps naively always think there's nothing I can't do. Like, I'm going to give it a crack. We're going to have a go at this. And I just tried really, really hard to impart that level of self-confidence, I suppose, or just backing yourself. Like, give it a go. What's the worst that can happen?
But I think there's a lot of value in that as well, right? Because you doing that, for them. So, maybe in your earlier days, there was someone that saw that in you and did that, and nudged you along. I think that there's so much value, especially with this upcoming generation of marketers, someone like yourself just giving the nudge and going, hey, actually, if we just give this a go, if we just push ourselves a little bit, if we just stretch beyond the current horizon, actually there are some pretty awesome things that can be uncovered. And the fact that you've done that in the past, felt that success, that is what is kind of like the ripple effect, right? That then goes on to the next, the next generation of marketers. And so I think that there's a lot in just that lesson alone of that not everything is going to happen straight away. You think that you put the B2B strategy forward and, it takes 2 years. But as you can see, rightly so, is that with that was always the right move. It was just the timing. And often in life and business, it's all just about timing, right? So I think there's a lot of lessons in that alone. So just to segue a little bit, when we look at the media advertising aspect and where media actually sits in the sort of the overall performance equation, when a store underperforms, how do you decide if it's a media level to pull, if it's an operational level to pull? How do you diagnose that, I guess? Because as a marketer, often you'll get thrown, but the marketing's not working, right? So
always.
How do you almost become a bit of a detective in that instance to go, okay, is this an operational problem? Is this a marketing problem? And actually, first and foremost, is it a problem? Like, what are we actually dealing with here?
Definitely. I love this question. It's one of my favorite questions to answer because I get to use my Grey's Anatomy analogies, which I am clearly a frustrated, never realized doctor or surgeon. And my analogy is and operations will always come and say, we need more marketing because sure, why not?
Sure. What do you got to lose?
what do you got to lose? Well, you got to lose money and you got to lose return on investment. So before we do that, how about, other than just looking at footfall, which is kind of like an X-ray, we look at the P&L, which is a CT scan. And then we look at another layer of figures, i.e. we use more granular figures to look at how well the floor space is returning, how well the inventory itself is returning, and the labor is returning. So let's look at those. That's like the MRI. And then ultimately, you then look at your conversion rates. And that's kind of the blood work. So you then have like this full kind of set of data that you can then properly diagnose. And I will tell you, 80% of the time, it is not footfall, and it's not the solution is not more market. The solution is either they've got too many staff on days where the footfall is less. Like they need to sort out their roster.
A utilization challenge, right?
The utilization challenge. Perfect. There we go. And so their conversion rates on those days are woeful. And then they've got not enough staff, particularly on weekends, because...
When actually it would be, I'd imagine pharmacies would be super busy on weekends, right? Like Saturday sport, you think about, about the amount of times I go to the pharmacy on the weekend as opposed to during the week. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Pharmacy's a bit quirky that way. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday mornings are super busy because, you know, the pensioners all come in and they all come in for their medications and whatnot, and people have seen GPs and GPs are calling. But yes, insofar as the broader kind of community is concerned, weekends are by far the busiest. And so if you've got all your full-time staff, which are your controlled costs, Monday to Friday, then of course you're going to try and skim back how much you're paying out of pocket over and above on your variable staff. And so then you have nowhere near enough people to serve and upsell and increase basket size for the amount of feet that are coming through the floor on the weekend. So that usually is the primary issue. And then
I just want to say on that, Yvette, because this is a really key point. And again, a lot of marketers are either, you know, doing this or stepping up to this level. The commercial acumen that you've just spoke about, and the way in which you've described the metrics and the numbers and the P&L and, you know, the way in which the staff are utilized, I think it's a really great example of the true understanding of the modern CMO, of the commercial reality. And just, you know, this little snippet here for those marketers out there listening, thinking about, okay, how can I elevate the conversation to the C-suite and the board level? What you've just described in this is a real deep understanding of the commercial acumen, the numbers behind the marketing that actually make the difference and actually make up the ability to drive the ROI. So I just want to acknowledge you for that, because there's a lot of marketers that are on that journey. And what I'm calling sort of the modern CMO, the modern marketer, of really being able to not only grasp this, articulate it, and then use it to their advantage to be able to drive growth in a business. That is, you know, where we are and we will continue to be as, you know, pressure, we have downward pressure on economy and profitability and all that kind of thing. So I just think that was an awesome example of, I mean, not to segue you, but an awesome example of that in absolute motion.
No, thanks. I mean, look, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you have different types of marketers that come to the point of a CMO level role. You have people who have come to marketing through business and economics, and then you have people who come to marketing through more creative avenues, and one tends to over-index on data and the other one tends to over-index on brand in the way that the brand comes to life. But the two can never be mutually exclusive. Like, they've got to actually work hand in glove, because at the end of the day, we all need to remember, whether we're highly creative people or we're business people, the point of marketing is to make businesses more money.
Absolutely.
And the minute we forget that is the minute you may as well put all of your tools down and walk out the door. That doesn't mean all you think about is money, but it means that has to be a connection between the metrics by which you judge the effectiveness of your social media. You know, the effectiveness of your content, all of that kind of stuff. If it's more creative and more brand building and more human and kind of more emotive, it's just further away from the money, and its influence is just further up the line. So I think, you know, everyone in our industry that actually acknowledges that, you know, incredible CMOs like Laura Tom, that was at
from GYG,
Nim Haysom, and all of those incredible CMOs, they are completely and utterly aware of those two spheres. It's a yin to a yang that have to come together. That
Absolutely. And we
doesn't
talk,
mean
yeah.
it
No,
doesn't
look,
mean
I
you
think it's,
produce work that's boring, any
yeah,
of that kind of stuff. You still want to produce really inspiring work that actually speaks to the needs and the challenges of the customer. But if you're not judging yourself based on the contribution that the work that you're producing has on the bottom line of the business or businesses it's there
yeah.
to serve, then you're kind of, you're boiling the kettle and you're not putting the hot water in the cup.
Absolutely. And I think it's to bring that all full circle, that commercially driven mindset. And I think you've said it beautifully, where you know that there are very real realities, very real commercial numbers that need to be achieved. And that beginning with the end in mind and looking at that fully integrated feedback loop to say, okay, if we're going to invest $1 million here, how is that going to unlock the 3, 4, or 5 million that really matter to grow this business? So I just think
Yeah.
it's a beautiful lesson in
Mm.
bringing that all full circle. So I guess to close on all of this, Yvette, you've just given us so much to think about. One question I have for you, just to bring this all full circle, is what's the one thing you know now about marketing that you wish you had have known earlier?
God, amazing question. I mean, my journey to marketing was a really, really different one. I did a media and communications degree and then went off and did an interior architecture degree.
As you do.
Yeah, and at the time, I think my parents thought I was insane and, typical of me.
Yeah.
My mum used to always say, "Jack of all trades, master of none," and I'm like, "Cool, thanks, mum." But what I wished I had known back then was everything you do in life is a contribution to the level and the difference of perspective that you bring to an organization. So if you're able to really just lean into the things that you're good at, that you're interested in, but you want a career in marketing, it's not all lost.
Hmm.
I think my combination of media and marketing degree in the first instance and comms degree, coupled with interior architecture, actually got me jobs because that sensibility, design sensibility, that aesthetic kind of eye is paramount in marketing, full stop. But also, it gave me an extra skill set for a career in property marketing, both residential property and commercial property, because you're dealing with interiors, buildings, all that kind of stuff, and retail, because at the end of the day, the biggest representation of your brand is your bricks and mortar store. So we did a whole brand guidelines redesign last year, which I absolutely loved. It was a project that I really enjoyed because it brought those things together. So I think, if you're just starting out on your career or if you've been doing something else and you want to switch, no time has been wasted because everything that you've done up until that point makes you a differentiated product for wherever you end up.
Okay, Yvette, thank you so much for joining us today for the breakdown you've given us in the full consumer journey from what happens at a head office level to come up with these incredible campaigns that drive the market beating results, and then obviously pulling that right through to an encounter experience. Just want to say a massive thank you to you for being on the show and sharing that knowledge with us.
My absolute pleasure. I have had a delightful time. Aleisha, every time we speak, it's always a highly enjoyable exchange. So getting to do it for a solid hour was a joy. Thank you.
Unreal. I know our listeners are going to get a ton of value out of the unique insights and perspective that you have been able to bring us today. So, Yvette, if people want to reach out to you, if they want to learn more, where can they find you?
Yeah, just reach out onto LinkedIn. Happy for people just to message my inbox and to discuss anything that we've either talked about today or in addition.
Wonderful. No, that's fantastic. Well, look, we've had an absolute masterclass in understanding the signals that especially at a CMO level, the signals that you really need to take note of in order to be able to understand what's working and what's not, to follow that intuition and then to be able to make decisions off the back of it, and then managing these multi-stakeholders, B2C, B2B. It's been an absolute roller coaster of different categories that we've been able to cover in such a broad context. So if you are a B2B marketer, if you're a B2C marketer, today you've really see those two worlds come together full circle to be able to really understand the nuances and how both can play a role and how you can leverage those skills across a B2C and B2B. So I hope you've enjoyed the episode. If you've got value from this episode, make sure you hit subscribe to the Black Box of Media and leave a review. It helps more marketers like you unlock the hidden strategies behind high performance marketing and media advertising. Let's keep this conversation going. If today's episode has sparked new ideas or challenged the way you think about media, I would love to hear from you. Drop me a message on LinkedIn and share your biggest takeaway. If you want more insider knowledge, you can listen or watch on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube for future episodes packed with actionable strategies. So until next time, keep pushing boundaries, keep testing, and most importantly, keep making marketing work harder for your business. I'll see you in the next episode.